What's up, everybody? I'm Thomas J. Bellezza, and welcome to another lesson from the right mindset. Today, we're going to go over crafting compelling scenes, identifying and fixing weak points in your fantasy writing. Exciting. That's actually pretty exciting. Things that we'll go over is how do you identify if a scene is compelling or not? We'll explore the elements needed to do so. And then I'll actually show you an example of a 500 word scene and then break down that scene for you in real time. Let's do it. Hit that intro. Right. Like I said, today's lesson is crafting a compelling scene. Basically, we're going to identify and fix weak points in your writing, your fantasy writing. Before we get started, if you're a beginner or you've been doing it for some time and you're a writer, author, screenwriter, please click that subscribe button in the bell icon so you don't miss out. If this is your first time here, we do lesson videos on craft. We also analyze and review storytelling. And we do interviews with fellow authors and other writers and talk about the business a little bit. Okay. Before you can write a compelling scene, you need to understand how to identify a bad scene. And that usually comes from a lack of setup first. That's the first thing. I put my hands in. That's the first thing you have to look for. So we're going to go over a couple of things about what you need to look for to say this scene needs work. And then I'm going to show you a scene and I'm going to kind of like work through the scene with you. All right. Here goes. Now, these are just a few things to help you identify a bad scene. But a scene needs three things, which is a setup, a conflict, and a resolve. Now, remember, conflict doesn't necessarily have to always be like there is a war going on. They are fighting. There's physical. It's life or death. Conflicts can have little moments. We're going to go over that, okay? But the first thing we're gonna focus on setup, okay? So you want to establish elements in a scene so you can explore and challenge those setups. Basically, what's the point of a scene, right? Every scene needs to serve a purpose beyond doing one specific thing and shouldn't just be there for character development. I say that because every time a character is in a scene, you should be developing their character through their choices. It's one of the things that I'll talk with clients too, or people just in general with writing, is they say, "Oh, I need this scene there because I'm developing the character, and this is a really good character moment." And you're like, "But it has nothing to do with plot." And what happened to all the other moments? Every time that character is on the page, they should be character developing moments. And if you need a scene to be like, I need people to know that this character is kind, so it's going to be a really good character development moment to show that this character is kind. No, show the character having opportunities to choose to be kind throughout your story, because that's what makes them up. A scene of them being kind is not who they are. They just happen to have been kind in that moment. So try not to use a scene to accomplish one thing, especially if it's character development. Character development should be happening always. And if it's a character-driven story, there's still plot. You know what I'm saying? But also, in every moment, the character is developing. They're not just a really great moment in one scene. A scene that needs to serve multiple purposes. And once you realize the point of a scene, you have to develop it and bring it out and immerse the experience. Some things that you want to set up in a scene is obviously you want to set the setting. The setting includes the physical environment, time of day, weather, location, and sense. Not that you have to use all of those, but those are some of the elements you might want to talk about. The setting can also set the tone for the story. It can evoke emotions and create a sense of atmosphere that can affect the mood of the characters and the reader. You want to represent description in the setup. You need to create a geography. You got to let people understand who's there, what's there, and why are they there. So descriptions can help the reader visualize the scene and create a mental image of characters, their surroundings, and their actions. This can include the appearance, clothing, mannerisms, and body language of characters, as well as details about the objects and scenery in the scene. Now, again, if you've watched other videos of mine, if you're going to describe someone, it's better to describe them through the narrative purpose than to just be like, they enter the room and there Riddick stood. Uh, his leather armor, protected his upper chest while leggings wrapped around his shins. His boots were filled with feather tops and brown stain. He carried upon his person a long sword that was 4 feet long, and the blade itself, that we can't see right now because it's sheathed, is carved with the insignias of his family's lineage. With each family line, the sword is handed down, and more is added to it. And he also is bestowed a short sword and a dagger to his right, strapped to his leg. Okay. No, but, what stands out about this character? Maybe when they do draw their sword, the insignia, the design itself might be something that somebody notices, or the narrator's like, he draws his sword, the insignia, the design on the blade itself pulls attention from the surrounding, the surrounding victims that await the slashing of this ancient blade. Now he's like, oh, there's something on the blade, and now that's something you can build on slowly. You don't have to spend a whole moment on what's on the sword. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, setups also, you need to introduce your characters in a scene, and this can help establish their personalities, motivations, and relationships with one another. This can include their history, backstory, and any relevant information that can add depth and complexity to their characters. Now, remember, introducing a character isn't Jacob enters the room and Melissa stands to his right, and Astra sits on a bench. No, let the characters come into the scene. Jacob pushed through the door first, with Melissa quickly behind him. Their aggressive energy approached Astra's and stopped right before his face. His finger pointing heavily, disturbed. Disturbed. A look of disturbance on his face. How can you allow that to happen in our house, our town? But the characters, their movement is what brings them into the room, or their purpose brings them into being set up. Dialogue can reveal character traits, establish relationships between characters, and create conflict and tension. It can also be used to reveal information that may be important or not. Now, dialogue, there is a difference between, are you really going to wear that, bro? Versus, you understand that we're going into a battle, and that's your choice. That's one representation of character. Another one is, I have an extra shield that'll help you if that's all you're going to wear, which is another one. Maybe another one is, for all the love I have for you, I cannot allow you to go into battle wearing just that. And that's the thing, like, these choices become character motivations. They become characteristics. Another one could even be as like, well, at least I know who's coming out of this fight alive. Right? It happens. Okay? Maybe they're two brothers, and they're in, one is the heir, and they go, well, I guess this will make it easy for me to become the next one, next for choice. Am I right? That's all you're wearing, huh? A shirt. All right. Foreshadowing is another thing you can set up, and this will hint to future events, create tension and anticipation, build suspense, etc., etc. It can be used through description, dialogue, and actions. Foreshadowing is like, Reiner Reiner sits across from the priest and takes note of the book's title that is placed on the shelf. Well, maybe that ends up being something important, either the name or the book or something about the book. Like, you could set up visual foreshadowing as well. Now, if you lack setup, we don't know what we're walking into. And I know there's that saying out there, start in the middle. But the middle becomes the beginning, and it still needs a setup. Just because they say start in the middle, it means, when people are coming into a room, they like knock on the door. Hey, you there? Who is it? It's me. Can I come in? Yeah, sure. They come in. And then like the meat of the scene starts happening. You should be starting just in the meat of the scene. Like, you don't always have to show characters going through the motions of things. We are heading to the next town of Vrak. We don't have to watch them head to the next town of Vlach unless something narrative is going to happen. Just make the next scene or the next chapter or the next beat them entering Vlach. That's the middle. That's the meat of the scene. And even more so, you don't even have to show them entering Vlach. You could have them entering a building, unpacking and going, the gatesmen of Vlach are not as respectful as I remember. Then you say to yourself, man, do I actually want to show that scene? Do I want to show them being disrespectful? Is that something that would be interesting to the narrative? Or them just noting that Vlach was not as nice as last time is enough, because that's not what the story is not about Vlach and how they're not nice anymore. It's just about them being at Vlach as a stopping point for the next thing. So you have to think about that when you're telling a story. What's the purpose of what I am showing and setting up? But setting up is not the very beginning of a scene. The setup is the beginning of the scene, meaning wherever the scene starts and you decide to start it, you have a setup point. Look at scenes like a book. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Act 1 sets it up. Let the beginning of your scene be Act 1 and go through the motions. And Act 2 is the conflict, which brings us to lack of tension. All right. Now, a scene without tension or conflict can feel dull and unengaging. I'm gonna contradict that in this lesson with another lesson. But for now, let's just stay on the fact or the idea that a scene without tension or conflict can feel dull and unengaging. When a scene in a novel lacks tension or conflict, it can make the reader feel disengaged and uninterested because nothing is really happening. Things are happening, but nothing is happening, meaning there's no stakes, there's no urgency, there's no agency. It's just, we need this stuff to be, the audience needs to know, the reader needs to know this, and this character needs to know this, and that character needs to tell that character something, and then we need to make sure that the character gets a sword, and then we got to get to the next scene. Basically, all I said right now is that scene, we don't need it. We don't need that scene. There's no tension, no conflict, no urgency, no agency. We might not need that scene. Because a lack of tension or conflict can make a scene feel aimless, with nothing driving the plot forward or keeping the reader invested in the story. And that's the thing. Even if you have a scene that's sort of like a lull on purpose to breathe and pause the action, it still needs to move the plot forward, either through the characters or the plot in general, or the scene is not complete. But here are a few ways to determine if a scene is suffering from a lack of tension or conflict. Ask yourself, what's at stake? Because every scene should have something at stake, whether it's a character's life, their relationships, their personal goals. If nothing is at stake, there's no reason for the scene to exist, and the reader will quickly lose interest. Now, I'll say this much. Again, at stake doesn't mean that it has to be life or death. It could be a choice. It could be a decision. It could be a philosophical stance. It could be a position. Because remember, every character has a position on something, and that creates the dialogue. That creates their stance. For example, I have long hair, and I've had long hair since I was 16, and I'm 45 years old. So if someone comes in and they're like, you shouldn't have long hair. Long hair is stupid and it's impossible to maintain. My position is that that is not accurate. No, I don't know. I've had long hair my whole life pretty much since I was 16. I could put it back. I could put it in a ponytail or a bun. I could leave it out. Washing it's not a big deal. No, hair long. I had long hair once for like 6 months. It was the worst thing. All right, well that's your position, but my position would make me defend long hair, whereas somebody else would attack that situation. And by the way, both of us would be right because our perspectives, and that's how characters work when they have a position. Their position is right because it's what they know. It's their perceived truth. Now, there is a thing as objective truth, and now we're talking about the limitation of knowledge. For example, if a character has never read a book or seen the world, and they're lived in the woods their whole life, and they come into a city and they get cut, and someone's like, "Oh, we could can place some medicine on there." And they're like, "Medicine? That's not a thing." They're like, "No, medicine is we've invented medicine. It's basically you take it. It's an antibiotic." No, that's evil. That's the devil. They're right because that's all they know. But the objective truth is that there is medicine, and it is not the devil. But they don't have enough knowledge. But again, that creates their position. Anyway, let's get back to it. So tension also, going back to tension, you want to check the pacing. And scenes without tension or conflict can drag on because it's just conversational. And slowing down the pacing of the story and making it feel like it's not going anywhere when it's just conversational. It can happen. Mark, the other day I was sitting around and I was thinking about fantasy football, and it made me think of you. Oh yeah, fantasy. My league is doing great. I mean, I just love. I picked up someone good, but they didn't do well in the last couple games, so I'm not really hitting anything. Oh yeah, well fantasy. It's definitely interesting. I mean, there's no real playing. It's you're just buying players that exist, but like we just what is it like 250? What are they talking about? Unless the story is about fantasy football or that's going to influence the story, there's nothing going. They're not even complaining. They're just discussing. Not that you have to complain, but they're just discussing fantasy football. There's no positions. It's just a with conversation, right? And the thing is, if you find yourself skimming through a scene you wrote or losing focus while reading it, it might be a sign that there's not enough tension or conflict to keep you engaged. And again, tension and conflict doesn't mean that they are fighting fisticuffs. It just means that their positions are being challenged, or their ideologies or their philosophies are being challenged to the point where they may grow as a character or double down and believe for some reason that even though Jupiter is so large that it orbits a counter a counter center just slightly outside the sun, and they believe that Jupiter still, because of that, it doesn't orbit the sun, even though it's in the orbit of the sun around the other planets. And then they double down and they go, no, it does not orbit the sun. You're like, it's not the last planet. It's a planet within planets. It's besides the point. All right. Another thing that could be happening is the tension or conflict lacks because the position is missing. And this is how you examine, this is when you have to say, I need to examine my character's motivations. Because characters should have clear motivations or positions for their actions in a scene. And these motivations should often come into conflict with other characters' motivations or external obstacles. Basically, two positions or more don't gel well. Some characters could have a different position, but at the same time, slightly agree with the new information of another position, though they'll still stand by their position. For example, I understand why you're saying there is no God. I've believed God my whole life. I have faith for God, but I can understand your I can understand what you're saying, and I could relate to that. Like, that's a character not changing their beliefs, but now we're finding common ground, and that happens. If a scene feels like the characters are just going through the motions with no clear reasons for their actions, it may be a sign that the scene lacks tension or conflict. In summary, a scene without tension or conflict can make a novel feel dull and unengaging. But asking what's at stake, checking the pace, looking for tension building devices, and examining the character's motivations and positions, you can determine if a scene is suffering from a lack of tension or conflict and take steps to make more engaging elements. While tension and conflict are often used to drive the plot forward and keep readers engaged, not every scene needs to have tension or conflict. This is where it's going to sound like I'm contradicting myself, but hear me out. In fact, some scenes may be designed specifically to provide a break from the tension and conflict of the story to allow the characters to rest and recover, or to provide important exposition or background information. For example, a scene that shows characters enjoying a peaceful day at the beach may not have much tension or conflict, but it can serve to provide a moment of respite from the stress and drama of the story. Similarly, a scene that provides important background or world building information may not have any overt tension or conflict, but it can be crucial for helping the reader understand the context of the story and the motivations, positions, etc. of your characters. Basically, a scene must have a curvature. It must have that conflict, that midpoint conflict, because remember, setup, midpoint conflict, resolution. But that conflict doesn't have to be pure tension or conflict. The scene, that midpoint could be the discovery of information or a character's something about the character that moves the plot forward, and the characters are all on the same page. This happens usually in like a mission briefing where the general or the commanding officer is like, we're gonna go in, you're gonna do blank blank blank, you're gonna do blank blank blank, I need you here to do that, I need you to do that, any questions? And everyone's like, no sir or ma'am, we got this, absolutely. And we appreciate you letting us be the people backing you up. Like, that scene is taking everything that led to that moment and letting it all build up. We know what the tension is, which is they have to resolve this conflict, and in this beat, the it's being moved forward by watching the characters interact with each other. We're learning about their characters' relationships in that sense, that they are trusting of the commander or whoever. And but now we have the exposition. We know what they need to do, and we know what each person is doing. That scene is okay because it is moving the plot forward. It's not just them talking about baseball when in reality they're in Predator. All right. That being said, even scenes without explicit tension or conflict can still have underlying tension or conflict, such as a character's internal struggles or interpersonal conflicts that are not immediately apparent. Additionally, scenes without tension or conflict should still serve a purpose in the larger story and contribute to the overall narrative in some way. What I'm saying there is, if the command is like, I need you to go and you're going to do this, and that character themselves has doubts about their ability to be the lookout, the sharpshooter. You know, earlier in the story, we've seen that they're having trouble hitting their mark because they're recovering from an injury. But they've been on this team for so long, and it's their first time back, and the captain's like, "You're my best friend. I'm going to give you a chance to prove yourself so you can get back in the game." The tension is the position that they're in. They don't feel they're ready, even though their captain does. But it's not really explored in the scene. But we already know because it was all set up in the setup before the scene in another scene. Oh, all right. We know they don't have, because we saw them practicing and they weren't that good. They weren't hitting their mark, even though they used to be sharpshooters. You know what I'm saying? So that creates tension too. So while not every scene needs tension or conflict, it's important to ensure that each scene serves a purpose in the larger story and contributes to the overall narrative in some way. All right. We got 2 more of these, and I'm actually going to 3 more, and then I'm going to show you an actual scene. Poor pacing. A scene that moves too slowly or too quickly can disrupt the flow of the story and make it difficult to stay engaged. Pacing is a critical aspect of telling story that can make or break a novel. A scene that moves too slowly or too quickly can disrupt the flow of the story and make it difficult to stay engaged. Here are a few ways to determine if a scene is suffering from poor pacing. Check your engagement. If you find yourself struggling to stay focused while reading a scene that you wrote, it may be a sign that the pacing is off. A scene that moves too slowly can feel tedious and boring, while a scene that moves too quickly can feel rushed and confusing. Sometimes you need to breathe a little, and sometimes you got to rush through it. You mix that up, you create pace. Look at the length of the scene. A scene that is too long can be a sign of poor pacing, as it can drag on and lose the reader's interest. Conversely, a scene that is too short can feel rushed and incomplete, leaving the reader feeling unsatisfied. Consider the events of the scene, and this should help you move the story forward and contribute to the overall narrative. If a scene feels like it's not adding anything new to the story or is simply rehashing information, which happens quite often when you're starting out, the reader doesn't need to know this if they already know this, and it may be a sign that the pacing is off. The other thing is transitions. Transitions between scenes should be smooth and seamless, with each scene leading naturally into the next. If a scene feels jarring or out of place, it may be a sign that the pacing is off. In summary, a scene that moves too slowly or too quickly can disrupt the flow of the story and make it difficult to stay engaged. By checking your engagement, looking at the length of the scene, considering the events of the scene, and checking the transitions, you can determine if the scene itself is suffering from poor pacing and take steps to adjust that. Remember that pacing is crucial. It's a crucial aspect of storytelling, and getting it right can make all the difference in creating a compelling, engaging narrative. All right, lack of description. The thing about lack of description is we need vivid descriptions for settings, characters, and action so we can feel invested, immersed. And if the scene doesn't have that, you might have to work on that. A scene that lacks vivid descriptions of settings, characters, and action can feel flat and uninteresting. And here's some ways you can determine if you're doing that. Check for sensory details. That's right. Vivid sensory details can bring a scene to life. We've talked about this many a times. Of course, show, don't tell, etc., etc. But you want to look for descriptions of sight, sound, smells, textures, and tastes of the setting and characters. Consider the pacing. We've already talked about that. When you're describing, if you're overly describing, you're gonna mess up the pace. If you're under describing, you might fly through the moment and not let the reader take in the moment, or even the characters take in the moment. And then you want to look at your dialogue. How is your dialogue moving the story along? Great dialogue reveals information about the setting, characters, and can help to break up long descriptions of scenes. So instead of spending time on a description, allow the characters to kind of reflect on what's going on. And then, of course, tone is important too. For example, a scene with a dark and ominous tone may require more detailed descriptions to create a sense of foreboding, while a lighthearted and humorous scene may require less description to maintain a quick pace. In summary, you want to check sensory details, consider the pacing, and looking at the dialogue, and think about the tone. You can determine if a scene is suffering from a lack of description and take steps to adjust the level of description to create a more immersive and engaging narrative. I will say this: remember that description is a powerful tool in storytelling, and using it effectively can bring your story to life. And finally, before we get into the scene example, extensive exposition. Even before I start reading my lesson, there is a difference between exposition or story exposition and character exposition. If the characters are exposing information through choices and interaction and reaction, much better. If it's just, we need this to be identified and you need to know this, not as strong. However, sometimes you need someone to just go, we only have 30 minutes to get this done or so and so dies. Sometimes you got to be that forward because now you create urgency. You create it's literally called a ticking time clock, right? So that is the tension builder, right? But my least favorite thing is excessive exposition. Scenes that are filled with excessive exposition or backstory can slow the story down and make it difficult to engage. It's like when you learn everything you need to learn about somebody, it's like, oh, I'm not going to remember that. Most people won't. The secret to good exposition is seeding it through the story and allowing emotional moments to stand out beats or character interactions or these beats where they directly influence the narrative or the character themselves. And if you do that in piecemeals, readers, especially readers, are going to maintain the information a lot easier than if you go, here's a chunk, you got to remember all this. And then you never really make reference to it again. But you're like, I talked about it in chapter 2. No, spread it out. And don't get me wrong, exposition is necessary for telling story, for having a strong narrative and creating plot points. But scenes that are filled with nothing but exposition or backstory can slow the story down and make it difficult to engage. Here are some things to be like, I might have too much exposition. Check for action. A scene that is heavy on exposition but light on action can feel slow and uninteresting. Look for opportunities to incorporate action or conflict into the scene to keep the reader engaged. Action doesn't necessarily mean running across the street. A fight, the plane is going down. Action is movement through story. So movement of characters, movement of positions, movement of arcs, like a debate. Like if two positions start in a debate in a scene, it's interesting to watch one alter their debate or change their debate, or the other person proves the other person's point. That's movement. But it can be a plane crashing or fight scene. It can be. But movement is just things are moving. Like the story's moving, the plot's moving, the characters are moving, they're developing. Consider the relevance. The information revealed through exposition should be relevant to the story and help move it forward. If the information doesn't contribute to the narrative, it may be a sign that the exposition is excessive. And that's why you look at the dialogue too, because if dialogue can be a great way to reveal information about the characters and their backstories through character exposition, meaning how much do they reveal? Why did they reveal it? What is the choice that led to that reveal? And there are opportunities to incorporate backstory and exposition through strong dialogue. Weak dialogue is, I started my life in 1978, and I was born on Long Island. My mother and father were still together, and I was one of so and so, and blah blah blah. Too much. but allow that conversation, to go back and forth. Your accent, you sound like you're from Long Island. Yeah, born and raised since 1978. Boom. Next beat. Oh yeah, I visited Long Island a couple times. Uh, and then the other person, and you got out? He's like, well, you got out. Oh, it took me a lot to get out. I had to join the army. You see? Okay. All right. Anyway, not that I joined it. I'm just telling the story. Okay. So what we learned. So now that we know how to identify a bad scene, let's see an example of a scene with all these elements working. Boop. All right. There we go. The scene above has all the elements I mentioned. So I'm gonna read through it, and then we're gonna go back, and then I'm gonna talk about it. Okay? And you get to see. Okay. The sun had set on the small town of Ellsworth, and the full moon was high in the sky. A chilly breeze swept through the trees that surrounded the town, causing the leaves to rustle and dance in the wind. The streets were empty, except for a few stray cats scurrying along, and a lone figure making its way down the main road. The figure was cloaked in darkness, and as it walked, the ground beneath its feet cracked with every step. The townspeople had been warned of the dangers lurking beyond the town's walls, and they had all retired to their homes, barring their doors and windows tight. But not the figure. It strode towards the gate, seemingly unafraid. The guards at the gate, two burly men with swords at their sides, stepped forward and barred the way. "What business do you have here?" the first guard asked, his voice low and menacing. "I come seeking an audience with the mayor," the figure replied, its voice cold and hollow. The second guard stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "And who might you be?" he demanded. The figure pulled back its hood, revealing a pale face with jet black hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to glow in the moonlight. "I am Arya, the Witch of the Woods," she said, her voice echoing through the silence. The gods stepped back, fear evident in their eyes. The Witch of the Woods was a legend, whispered about in hushed tones, but never seen. She was said to be able to command the forces of nature, to bring down lightning from the sky and cause the very earth to tremble. All right. So this is a page and a half. Okay. The setup is there. All right. The setup is there. So let's go over it. It has a clear purpose. Okay. Arya is seeking help to defeat the Dark Lord, right? Now, we don't have that evidence here because this is just. Oh wait, the Dark Lord has returned. Yeah, so sorry. I come seeking your aid. Voice did I finish? Oh no, okay. I gotta finish it. Huh. Arya stepped forward and the gods parted, allowing her to pass through the gate. As she walked down the empty streets, the wind picked up and the trees creaked ominously. I sense a foreboding a sense of foreboding filled the air, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She reached the town hall where the mayor was waiting for her, his face etched with worry. What brings you here, witch?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I come seeking your aid," Arya replied, her voice steady. "The Dark Lord has returned, and I need your help to defeat him." The mayor's eyes widened in shock. The Dark Lord was a figure from ancient times and provided a pure evil who had been banished from the land by the greatest wizards of the age. "How could we defeat him?" the mayor asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "By finding the Sword of Light," Arya said, her eyes narrowing. "It is the only weapon that can defeat him, and I know where it lies." Okay. Sorry about that. All right. Okay. So, some elements I mentioned is it has a clear purpose. Arya is seeking the help to defeat the Dark Lord. Okay. It has a setting, the dark and eerie town of Eldersworth. It has character introductions. All right, we know who Arya is. We know the guards and the mayor. It has dialogue between Arya and the guards, and Arya and the mayor. It has foreshadowing, the mention of the Dark Lord's return and the Sword of Light. Right now, the setting. The setting is set in a small town called Eldersworth. The sun has set and the moon full is high in the sky, creating an eerie and dark atmosphere. The surrounding trees create an ominous environment. What are you doing, puppy? My little puppy sleeping under the table. Um, he's not a little. He's 9 and he's a Rottweiler. But anyway, he's gonna be my little baby. The surrounding trees create the ominous environment, and the chilly breeze that has swept through them creates a sense of foreboding. But also, we're getting a sense that this is not a very warm city. The town is deserted except for a few stray cats and a lone figure. That's the setup. Okay. And of course, we have our characters. We have the protagonist, which is Arya, the Witch of the Woods. She is mysterious, and her appearance is cloaked in darkness. Her voice is cold and hollow, which adds to her enigmatic character. And then the guards at the gate, 2 burly men with swords at their sides, are the antagonists who are like, hey, you can't come in here. And she's like, yeah, I can. And they're like, all right, you can. The plot centers around Arya seeking an audience with the mayor. She's again, dude, he's so funny. Are you okay? One second. Are you okay? Oh, he's like really snuggled in there. All right. But so she's seeking the mayor's aid to defeat the Dark Lord, a figure from ancient times. Now people are scared of her as the witch. But she's nervous about the Dark Lord. She needs their assistance because they got to go get the Sword of Light, and she knows where it is, which is a great way to kind of end that scene, right? The conflict in the scene arises when the guards stop her, and the guards are skeptical of her intentions and question her identity. However, they quickly step back when Arya reveals that she is indeed the Witch of the Woods. And then, there's a deeper conflict. Is her mission to defeat the Lord, the Dark Lord, which is dangerous and requires her to seek help from townspeople. Now, the tone of the story itself is ominous, with a sense of foreboding in the air. The descriptions of the town and the environment create a dark and eerie atmosphere with the full moon, etc., etc. And the guards are menacing and skeptical. And of course, her appearance is mysterious. So the scene itself, hits all those beats, right? So first we set up the scene. We're bringing you into the scene and letting you know. All right, full moon, a chill breeze swept through the trees that surround the town. So again, the sun had set on the small town. This is where are we? So the narrative description is setting where we are. And what time is it? Well, it's the full moon is high in the sky. Then a chilly breeze swept through the trees that surround the town. Now we're describing not only the environment feel, but the geography of it, so we understand what's going on. And this causes the leaves to rustle and dance in the wind. That's poetic, I guess. The trees were empty. The streets were empty, except for a few stray cats. All right, so there's a reason for that, right? And a lone figure making its way. So we use this to describe the entrance of the witch. All right, and the figure was cloaked in a darkness. As it walked beneath the crackle, the townspeople had been warned of dangers lurking. This is a narrative representation of the town itself. But it's also setting up, it's the seed that leads to, she's not scared. And the guards are like, yo, who are you? What's going on? And she's like, I'm coming here for the audience of the mayor. And they're like, no, you're not. And she's like, oh, no? Boom. Now she reveals herself, which creates a position change. Her revealing that she's the Witch of the Woods creates a position change in the guards. Right, puppy? But ultimately, yeah, go in there. Go ahead, Boobala. But ultimately, the guards let her through because their position of power has been challenged because she's the witch and she's scary. All right. And then, of course, the second part of the conflict is when she talks to the mayor, who's scared that it's the witch. And then it's like, the Dark Lord, I need your help. And he's like, all right, let's do this. I hope that helped. Final thoughts. Identifying a bad scene is crucial in writing a successful novel. A bad scene lacks proper setup, tension, and pacing. Oh, that's the other thing. The scene moved. Like, there was no yibber yabber. Even though there could have been a little bit of yibber yabber, and that's okay. Every moment either moved the narrative forward, this brought us into the scene, created position. Even the dialogue, like the dialogue wasn't frivolous. It had purpose. And sometimes when you're writing your first draft, just write the most purposeful stuff you can while letting it out. Like, especially if you're working off an outline, like, how do I get this moment on there? And then when you do your second draft, that's when you can kind of fluff it up a little bit, kind of add more of your voice and stuff like that. But you want to get it out. A scene should also have a clear purpose, and every element should contribute to the overall narrative, just like I said. The setting, description, character introductions, dialogue, even the foreshadowing should be used effectively to establish the scene and create a sense of atmosphere that affects the mood of the characters and the reader. The lack of tension or conflict can make a dull scene and make people feel unengaged. And therefore, every scene should have something at stake, and characters should have clear motivations for their actions. While not every scene needs tension or conflict, each scene should serve a purpose in the larger story and contribute to the overall. Like, again, if we go back to this real quick, like when the witch is talking to the mayor, there is a conflict between the mayor and her, as in, like, he's scared of her. But her conflict is later on. Like, look, I have a conflict that's going on. I need the sword. I need your help to get the sword. The conflict isn't that they're fighting or arguing or there's a battle. The conflict is the needs. Like, needs become like, I need these things. I need toothpaste. That's a conflict. I have no toothpaste. I got a date at 8:00. I need to get toothpaste to brush my teeth. That's a conflict. And again, it's not a big conflict. I need toothpaste, right? So, and keep in mind, poor pacing can disrupt the flow of a story. Therefore, writers should pay close attention to the pacing of the story. And sometimes, how do I get to where I need to go the quickest? And then if the pacing's too fast, now you could start working in flavor. You could add more description, or you could allow dialogue to have a little bit more playroom. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, by paying attention to these elements, writers can create engaging scenes that contribute to a successful novel. Remember, writing is an art form, and writing a novel is no different. It requires patience, practice, and perseverance. The 3 Ps. Not the 2 Ps, not the PPs. The 3 Ps, the PPPs. Patience, practice, perseverance. Not PP. No one needs PP. We need the PP, but you don't need the PP. Unless that's your thing, then I don't care. I'm not judging. Writing a great novel takes time, but with dedication, anyone can create compelling stories. All right. You know what that brings us to? The next video. The next video in the series will focus on the building blocks of scene structure. Learn the basic elements that make up a scene, including opening, middle, and closing sections. In that next video, we'll explore how to create compelling opens that hook readers from the first sentence. Next, we'll dive into the heart of the scene and discuss techniques for building tension and conflict in the middle section. Since we just expressed you should have conflict and tension, so we'll actually go over techniques for that. And then finally, we'll wrap up our exploration of a scene structure by examining how to craft satisfying endings that leave readers wanting more. Question. How do you place the need for tension and conflict in a scene with the desire to give characters time to rest or provide background information? Let me know in the comments below. See, I'm giving it to you. Let's see if you can help us. All right. If you like what you watched and you haven't done so already, please subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss out. And that's pretty much it, right? So I guess, as always, keep developing the right mindset. I'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye.